All right, we are here for our daily Bible reading, and we're focused on Genesis 46 and 47, where Joseph takes his family to Egypt, or his family comes to Egypt. And it's one of the places where one of the more famous differences between the Septuagint and the Masoretic texts happens, besides all the extra stuff that is in the Septuagint. So one of the big differences in Stephen's speech in Acts, how many people does Stephen say go down to Egypt with Joseph or with Jacob? Do you remember?
Is it like 74?
75, close. And how many does our text today say? If you're using the English Standard Version, the English Standard Version gets its Old Testament largely from the Masoretic text, which is the Hebrew copy, the most popular Hebrew version of the Old Testament. And what does that say? What number does that say?
70.
70.
Flat,
yeah, even. So people sometimes, when they read over in Acts chapter 7, and then they come back here and they look in Genesis 46 and 47, they look at it's at chapter 46, and they look at this number, and when he says the number of people that went down was 70, and then they see Stephen say 75, some people go, well, he made a mistake. Well, did he make a mistake?
No.
Right. It depends on which text family, right? Which textual family that you're drawing the information from. And that kind of helps us to understand that as these narratives get passed on down through history, there isn't a single way that they're told. And that we have to kind of grapple with that as believers when we're dealing with inspiration. But that's not really the topic of our discussion tonight. That may be a great topic for a questions class sometimes, for a great question to bring up, the idea of inspiration and how the text is transmitted through time, because it's a little more messy than people tend to think. And that's okay, because people are messy, and God uses humans to transmit the text. Right? So it's actually quite beautiful that God uses us, flawed creatures, to transmit the text of Scripture. Okay, so chapter 46, the people are coming to Egypt. Joseph goes and gets his family. They all come, or the family comes. There's the big list of people we're not going to go through, but at the end, they get counted, and there's 70 or 75. Another interesting thing that Ania and Jaden pointed out is that it talks about Jacob's daughters, plural S. Who's the daughter that is named?
Dinah. There's a whole thing with her.
Dinah, yeah, the whole thing with her, right? And the people of Shechem, right? We'll just call it the Dinah thing, right? Yeah, there's a lot that goes on. There's only one named daughter, but here in the text, it talks about in chapter 46, it says that Joseph is bringing his daughters. So there's more than one. How many daughters are there?
At least two.
At least two, right? Who knows how many? We don't know. And that can explain for some of the difference. That's not the explanation that's normally given, but that can explain for some of the difference between the 70 and the 75 that we mentioned earlier. But it's an interesting note that even though only one daughter is named, Dinah, because of that whole thing with Shechem, there's more, right? And so the Bible, when you're getting the narrative, sometimes there's moments like this where it talks about Joseph or Jacob's daughters. There's moments like that where it indicates that you didn't get the full picture earlier. And that's okay, right? The Bible is not under, the writers of the Bible are not under the obligation to tell you the whole story every time they tell you anything, right? Nobody tells stories like that. Some people do, but they're really boring to listen to, right? Because they can't tell you anything without telling you everything. And typically you cut them off and you say, all right, just tell me the main point. Right? People don't communicate like that. We don't tell the whole story all the time. Nobody starts off telling you about watching a home run at a baseball game by saying, I woke up that morning and the first thing I did was I put my socks on, right? Nobody does that. And so what we see is that's not how people tell stories. Okay, so what did you guys notice in our text?
I thought it was interesting that Jacob, in the very beginning of chapter 46, has a, I guess, dream or vision from God telling him that it's okay to go to Egypt.
Yeah. Anything else? Why do you think that's important?
It just seems like usually, so far, whenever people have been going to Egypt, God never told them to and never approved of it, I guess. But this time he tells him to go. And it's also interesting that the way he's called, like his name and his response, resembles very closely that of Samuel later.
Yeah, you're right. So why do you think it's significant that God tells them to go to Egypt this time, but all throughout the rest of the text, you're constantly being told, don't go to Egypt, don't go to Egypt, don't go get help from Pharaoh, just leave Pharaoh alone. But now all of a sudden it's, hey, go to Egypt, Pharaoh will take care of you. Why do you think that's the case?
Because of the famine.
Yeah, there is this famine, and God is going to keep his people alive. And there's a couple really powerful things that are going on throughout the rest of the text, right? You've got the prophecy, out of Egypt I will call my son. And so there's this idea of God calling his people out of Egypt, setting up kind of a theme that will be used throughout the rest of the scriptures, this idea of coming out from among them. You have the promise given to Abraham, right, that we've read earlier, where Abraham is told that your children are going to be mistreated, and then God will judge the nation by which they're mistreated, which again sets up another theme, that the world persecutes the people of God, but there is a day of reckoning that comes for that persecution. And so as the people of God, the Hebrews should not have expected their time in Egypt to go well. Right? And that may be one of the reasons why Jacob is a little reluctant to go. If he remembers what Abraham is told.
He was reluctant?
Well, he has this vision that says, you need to go. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt.
Which would seem to indicate that he didn't really want to.
Yeah. And it may have been that prophecy that's like, I don't know if I want to go. Right? But God says, no, you should go. I'll take care of things. It'll be okay. And so there's a lot going on. You're right. The fact that we have this vision that starts off chapter 46 is really significant. Okay, so when we read this morning, we did not read all the names. And if you're reading along with us, you don't have to read all the names every time a list comes up. You can get a lot out of the lists. There's some significant truths that can come from the lists. But if it's your first time reading through, or if that tends to make your eyes glaze over and you just get lost, then just skip the lists. It's okay. You don't have to read through them all. This morning when we read, we just skipped the list, right? Largely because we had smaller people at the table, and going through a list of names tends to lose them. Right? So you don't have to read it every single time. Okay, so then at the end of 46, they kind of get coached, right? Joseph is going to say, hey, when you go talk to Pharaoh, make sure and tell him that your occupation is that you're shepherds and that you've always been shepherds. Why do you think that he tells them to say that? Is he being nefarious? Is he being, nefarious isn't the right word there. Is he being conniving?
So that they can live in the land of Goshen.
Yeah. He's got a place where he wants them to go. He's kind of got things spied out for them. And he tells them the truth. You know, the shepherding.
Egyptians don't like shepherds.
Yeah, it's an abomination to the Egyptians. And sometimes, if you know how to answer somebody, things will go better for you than if you don't. And so I don't think that he's being conniving here or duplicitous or anything like that. I think he's just kind of letting them know, hey, you know, if you want to live here, this is what you need to say. Right? And he's not telling them to lie. I mean, they are shepherds. He's just telling them, make sure and say this so that you can have the land that you want to be in. And actually what you're going to see is Pharaoh's going to do them one better. Right? He's going to tell them they can live anywhere, and they're going to also shepherd in Goshen, and they're also going to look after Pharaoh's flocks. Right? So Pharaoh's going to treat them really well because of Joseph. But there is some alluding here, right, foreshadowing to things that are not good. Right? We've already seen earlier in our text that the Hebrews were an abomination to the Egyptians. And now we're seeing here the shepherds are an abomination to the Egyptians. There's 2 strikes. And as you're going through chapter 47, you're going to see that all of the people basically are turned into the property of Pharaoh, which means that the Hebrews eventually are going to be seen as the property of Pharaoh, which is 3 strikes. Right? So things are not going to be going well for the Hebrew people. Right? We've got a lot of foreshadowing here to when the Hebrews are going to be brought into bondage. Right? They're an abomination themselves. They have an occupation that is an abomination. and they're going to be slaves, right? They're going to become property. And so you have all these things that are kind of striking against the humanity of the Hebrews, to where the Egyptians are going to view them very, very poorly, to the point where it's not a big deal to throw Hebrew babies into the Nile, right, to expose them and do all those things that are going to be coming in Exodus. And so anytime you see a society trending toward dehumanizing a population group, in the not too distant future, very often bad things happen. Right? That is a pretty consistent theme throughout human history. Anytime a culture, society, tribe, nation, whatever, dehumanizes a certain segment of that population, atrocity is right around the corner. I mean, that happens here. It happens in our own nation's past. It happens multiple times throughout history. I mean, it's one of those unfortunate things that is repeated. And so we have to be careful, right? This is something we can see playing out here in the text. We can see it playing out multiple times throughout history. And so as a person who stands for righteousness, if you see your society trending toward the dehumanizing of a segment of that population, you have to stop it. Right? You have to do what you can to make sure that doesn't happen. Sometimes you can't stop it, but you can't stand by quietly. Okay? All right, so chapter 47, they're going to come, they're going to talk, they're going to settle in Goshen, everything's great. Joseph is going to provide for them. You can see in verse 12, chapter 47, verse 12, Joseph provides for them according to the number of their dependents, right? So the bigger your family, you get a proportional amount of care. So that's nice. He takes care of them. But that is in opposition to the rest of the people of Egypt. Now, how do you think the Egyptians are going to feel when maybe a generation or two down the line, when they look and you've got all these Hebrews who are getting food for free and have their property and whatever, and they don't have any property, they don't have any animals, they have to give a fifth of everything that they raise to Pharaoh? How do you think they're going to feel?
Not very good.
Yep, who let these foreigners in here? They're taking everything over. Right? That is kind of how it plays out through the Exodus account. Right? These foreigners, these Hebrews are going to take everything over. That's a pretty consistent feeling all throughout human history also. No matter what country you're dealing with, the people who live in that country, or tribe, or city-state, or whatever, when people from the outside come in, they're always viewed with suspicion. Right? What are they doing here? Well, that's why one of the characteristics of God is that he cares, he loves the foreigner. Right? Hospitality, the Greek word that shows up over in Hebrews chapter 13, do not neglect to show hospitality, is actually xenophile, is the Greek word, or the love of strangers, right? The love of foreigners. And so the idea here is that God shows compassion and kindness to those who are outsiders, right? And we were outsiders, enemies of God, and he showed his great love to us by sending his son to redeem us. And so he expects his people to be xenophiles, to show care, concern, kindness, love towards those who are outsiders. Right? And so to a believer, to a Christian, there should be really no such thing as a foreigner. Now, as far as the government where you live is concerned, there may be different rules or regulations regarding, how people can come in, migration, all sorts of things like that. I'm not saying that Christians have to be set to go change the law of the land where you live, but you as an individual, right, wherever you happen to live, wherever you happen to be a citizen, you should have this mindset, right? God expects you to be kind to the outsiders. Right? To you, there should really be no outsider. And so that's a way of personal conduct for the believer. And here, God is going to come back to this. In the law, when he tells the Hebrew people to be kind to the sojourner in their midst, to the outsider, he's going to say, remember how you were the outsider in Egypt. So this is a pretty significant event. So the famine is going to come, and Joseph is going to enrich Pharaoh. He's going to sell the grain, take everybody's money. Then he's going to take all their animals. Then he's going to take all their property and their persons. He's going to take everything. And Pharaoh will become the autocratic ruler of Egypt.
So what was he before?
It was it was a little bit more complicated than that. He was not a absolute monarch in the sense that the king owns everything, right? At least according to our text here. And there is some debate historically about which Pharaoh you're dealing with. And so depending on which Pharaoh historically you think you're dealing with, that affects that answer, right? But according to what we're shown in the text, Pharaoh doesn't own all the land, right? There were people who owned land. Pharaoh doesn't own all the people, and Pharaoh didn't own all the stuff. But afterwards, Pharaoh owns everything. And so you kind of get an absolute monarch. And if your king is good, that doesn't matter. But if the king is bad,
you're in trouble.
You're in a big trouble. Yeah. And so you're also kind of setting your anti-God here, right? You have an anti-God figure. Who owns everything?
God.
God. Who do all the people belong to?
God.
Right. And all your stuff, who does that really belong to?
God.
God, right? So really, God is the one who owns everything. And so what you kind of got building here in chapter 47 is your anti-God figure, this Pharaoh, who is going to stand opposed to God in the Genesis account. And so you're getting kind of the groundwork for that in the story.
You mean the Exodus account?
Yes. What did I say?
Genesis.
Yeah, I'm wrong. The Exodus account. And so you're kind of getting this figure built up so that when you get to Exodus, you're going to have God saying, hey, these are my people, and they're going to come and sacrifice my stuff to me. And you have Pharaoh who says, no, they're my people. I own them. Right? And so you're getting this I guess, anti-God figure built up for you. Okay, so anything else that you guys noticed in that section there? Is Joseph doing a kind thing to the Egyptians?
No.
No. Where did he get all of that grain that he's got stored up throughout the country?
From their fields?
From them. Yeah, he takes their grain. Those 7 years of plenty. I mean, Pharaoh probably has some of his own property, right? There's some government things, I'm sure. But the grain comes from the people. He takes it from the people. And so he takes their grain and then he sells their grain back to them. How would you feel if I took your stuff and sold it to you?
I'd be pretty upset.
Yeah, that's not just at all. Right? And so when it comes to the sense of biblical justice, now you might argue, well, I mean, as far as economic policy is concerned, it's sound thinking. You know, governments tax the people and this and that and the other. But we're not talking about governmental policy. We're talking about biblical justice. Right? From a justice perspective, is this a just way to treat the Egyptian people? To take their grain from them and then not only sell it back, right, but to plunder them. He took all their money. And then he took all of their animals. And then he took their land and their person. He plundered them. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Bad thing.
That's bad. That's not just. And so again, when we come and we look at the book, Joseph is failing us at this point. Right? Now, I don't think he's being wicked in the sense that he's setting out to do anything malicious. Maybe he is. I don't know. The text doesn't tell us that. But what we do see is Joseph failing to be godlike, right? Godly. And so this is a moment where Joseph kind of falls short. And the biblical text does that for us. It shows us these people. It builds them up. There's these great moments where they're faithful or some great thing happens. And then shortly after or shortly before, they fail miserably because they're just people. Right? There are points in Joseph's life where you can go, man, I want to be like that. But then there's other points in his life where you're like, oh, he shouldn't have done that. Because Joseph is not the hero. Right? Judah, the Redeemer, who offers himself, right? He's not the hero either. David will come later. Abraham's not our hero. Samuel's not our hero. None of these people are the hero. But they do have bright, shining moments. Right? So I think we see Joseph fail here. At least fail to be godly as far as justice is concerned. Any other things that you guys noticed or saw?
No, not really. I mean, Jacob was really old, but
147. Yeah, which in the span of Genesis is not that old. And he kind of says that, right? When Pharaoh says, "How old are you?" Which it's kind of funny. It makes it seem like he must have seemed really old.
He was 130.
Yep.
That seems old to me.
Mm-hmm. It should, right? It should seem old. And so he's going to say, yeah, I'm 130, but I'm young compared to some people. And it's true when you've got people living to be 900 or, Methuselah 969.
Yeah, but that was a long time before him.
Well, you don't have to go back all that far to get people who are old. Right? Abraham lives to be much older than 147.
How old was he again?
It's 175, I think.
Yikes.
Something like that, yeah.
Almost two centuries.
Mm-hmm.
That guy was old.
And so you don't have to go back very far to get to people who are pretty old.
I wonder if he aged the same way.
Well, Pharaoh does look at him and go, "How old are you?" so it makes it seem like he might be kind of old, at least look old, but he probably looks good for 130. Right, but he had to be carried to Egypt.
Yeah, in the chariots or carts.
Yeah, so he didn't walk. He got carried to Egypt.
I wouldn't let someone 130 walk hundreds of miles either.
No, right. No, you would take care of them. And so you see that. All right, so that's a pretty good spot to stop. We'll pick up next time. We'll finish the book of Genesis, and we will move on into Exodus at the end of the week.
I do have one question.
Okay.
Why does he not want to be buried in Egypt?
That is a good question. Let's talk about it next time. Remember, we'll start with that because we're about to run out of time. All right, so that's where we'll start. Why does Jacob not want to be buried in Egypt?
And later Joseph.
Joseph doesn't either, right? So that's a good question.
So it's like a family thing.
Yeah. Well, actually, yes, it is. And we'll start with that next time because it is in our reading next time. Joseph's bones get carried out. All right. Thanks for joining us.